Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of Diverse Talk Matters. To talk about different things around diversity, equity, inclusion, talk about things that people may find challenges with, so we hope you find them really useful. Some are around people's different lived experiences, some really challenging conversation, things that sometimes we don't need to talk about. But we really hope you enjoy the range of topics that we are introducing to you or bringing to you, to your homes, to your house, to your workplaces. We hope you enjoy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode. Today, I am thrilled to be with Lisa and having a wonderful conversation about all things Lunar New Year, East and Southeast Asian representation, family, practices, traditions, and food. So I'm your host, Mikayla Sinead, and as I said, I'm here with Lisa. Lisa, please introduce yourself and how you're involved with diverse matters.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mikayla. Great to be here. So glad to be on today. I'm Lisa Wang. I am a public speaker and equality, diversity, inclusion consultant. I focus on East and Southeast Asian issues and topics, and with a structural racism component as well. And in addition to my work as a diversity and inclusion consultant and public speaker, I also work on race equality at the Greater London Authority for the Mayor of London. So, really interesting space to be in between, to be so closely connected to our grassroots communities and to be able to feed in to the wider London policies. So, really excited to talk about this today. It's such a rich plethora of topics that we've got on offer today. So yeah,
So
excited to
much.
see where it goes.
Brilliant. So much to talk about. I'm excited too. I think what will be really useful for the top of this episode is if we're able to go through some terms that we'll be using just to make sure that everyone's clear. So would you like to share some terms that we'll be utilizing as we move forward in this conversation?
Yes, of course. So for this podcast, we'll be referring to East and Southeast Asian communities, cultures, rituals, and as an acronym, it's ESEA. Sometimes people call it EC. I think there's all various different ways of using that reference, but for the purposes of today, I'll just say East and Southeast Asia, East and Southeast Asian communities, or ESEA. And we'll be talking about Lunar New Year, which encompasses celebrations in the lunar calendar and lunar solar calendar, which is celebrated across many different countries in East and Southeast Asia, including Chinese diaspora across those countries, as well as within different countries themselves. So, as a broader term, Lunar New Year captures a lot more than just Chinese New Year.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. Okay. Let's now that we're all clear, now we've all got our language correct and how we're moving forward, I'd love to hear about Lunar New Year and some of the traditions and some of those that are well known and those that are not so well known with folks. And yeah, what happens in this very joyous time?
Yeah, I think the first thing, the caveat is that not all cultures, countries celebrate Lunar New Year in the same way. Not all countries even go according to the same calendar. So for a few countries, I think China, Vietnam, Korea, they celebrate according to the lunar solar calendar, whereas I think in Japan, they celebrate according to the Gregorian calendar. So the times at which different countries will be celebrating their versions of New Year can really vary. And even for me as a Chinese diaspora, I often don't know when the lunar calendar falls on a particular year. I turn to trusty Google or trusty mum to figure out when to celebrate. And as a diaspora, I've also turned to my mum to ask how to celebrate. And I know, Mikayla, we were talking about what's our proximity to celebrating our culture in the ways that they often are and the ways that they're known to be, because I think my relationship with what Chinese culture looks like and how it should be celebrated has really developed over time. So much of it is food related for Lunar New Year. There's lots of parallels with other New Year type traditions. first of all, it's a really joyous time. It's a huge holiday in the calendar, and a lot of people equate it to the same or greater significance as Christmas, with the family gathering elements of Thanksgiving and all the kind of celebrations and joy and promise of a New Year's Eve celebration. So there's spring cleaning elements in a lot of cultures in the time leading up to Lunar New Year. And again, that's just to, symbolically clean away any kind of bad luck, to start the year afresh on a clean slate, and to welcome in great fortune. Certain cultures will visit family shrines or tombstones around this time as well. And then there's usually a lot of gathering in family houses. For example, I think for most cultures, there's, depending on how long you gather for, I think in Korea, that period is about 3 days or so when they celebrate Lunar New Year. But in China, they take at least 5 days national holiday to celebrate this period. And a lot of people who've migrated to different tier 1 cities for work purposes, they will all kind of leave the cities so that the city becomes a ghost town. They go back to their provinces or different towns where their families are from, to spend time with everyone. And food is such a central part of the celebration, both the preparation, which becomes its own ritual in Korea. The preparation of across different generations just brings people together, and the act of cooking certain foods as well is symbolically the act of bringing people together. For example, dumplings, you have the wrapper, you have the filling, and I remember family members sitting around the TV, my grandma on the meat filling station, just mixing pork with Chinese Shaoxing wine, different soy sauces with her chopsticks, and kind of every now and again just tasting the raw mixture for flavor. And then the rest of us being at the wrapping stations and trying to figure out how to wrap things in a way where it's kind of structurally sound. We had quality control at different points, but the dumplings were meant to be a symbol of literally folding and wrapping your family together. And so it's for me, it always feels like a very nostalgic act of bringing family together. And yeah, similarly across different cultures, in Korea, they eat rice cake soup. And the symbolism there is that you have these small disc-shaped rice cakes that resemble coins. So again, symbolizing prosperity and symbolizing new beginnings, and because of the whiteness of the color of the rice cakes, for example. And yeah, I can go on about food, and maybe we should, because there's so much richness in the different types of dishes that are eaten and how different cultures do that. But in addition, there's the rituals of red envelopes being given out, and it might vary depending on who's giving the red envelopes to who across different countries. And they're often not given only for Lunar New Year, but red envelopes, you might see them in weddings, in funerals also, and, birthdays, or just seeing family and friends. So that's also a big component for a lot of Lunar New Year traditions. I think what people will definitely be familiar with are the dragon dancing, the lion dancing that often takes stage in different Chinatowns, for example. So yeah, there's a whole host of activities, probably food comas, and yeah, it usually just lasts for quite some time across different countries.
That sounds beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. I love the symbolism conversations here, and yeah, just like the rich, deep traditions. It must feel like such an amazing time to be able to be with the family in those moments. And I love how you described it as all of these different elements of, different sort of occasions that are all wrapped up in one, and it's yeah, it's like I have not stopped smiling, honestly. I'm pretty close to my family. I'd say that confidently, and that just sounds like an absolute dream. And I can only imagine what that's like for folks who, with their family and their chosen family, I would say as well, are able to celebrate in that way. One of the things that struck me as well is the conversation about family and things. And my curiosity is how are each generation celebrated, or what role does each generation have in the celebrations? I'm thinking about how are elders celebrated, how are the children celebrated, like what are the other specific roles that you have depending on the age that you are, and yeah, what does that look like in an intergenerational way?
Yeah, that's such a good question. In terms of the gathering in certain countries, that your age and seniority determine whose house you gather at. For example, visiting the eldest kind of man and kind of in their home, that would be one way to decide whose house you visit for the duration of the celebrations. In terms of ages and generations, and even marital status sometimes, that determines who gets the rent envelopes and who has to gift them. And again, they can really vary across different cultures and across, I think, just even individual circumstance and practice. But as an example, for myself, I'm of British Chinese heritage. When I go back to China, I receive red envelopes from my elders. So they'll be my grandparents, my parents, they'll gift red envelopes to me. If I end up seeing other elders, like my parents' friends, they might, and if it falls within a Lunar New Year period, then cha-ching, I get more red envelopes. I don't know whether I mentioned red envelopes contain money. When you're unmarried, you're more likely to receive this money as well. But in some circumstances, you might find that the moment that you become married or the moment you start earning a wage, you'll be expected to then gift red envelopes, not necessarily to your parents or your elders, but very possibly to the younger generations or anyone who's younger than you, especially kids. So yeah, that was one of my main rationales for delaying marriage, to be honest.
Well, this is what I was going to ask you, because recently, and congratulations again, you have got married, and I'm curious about how this year for you is going to stack up differently to how it has in the past. Now that you're married, and yeah, is it still cha-ching?
Yeah, well, we'll have to see. Again, I'm going to have to check the Google or my mum to figure out what's the right way to go about the red envelopes this time. I've not been back to Asia, back to China to celebrate Lunar New Year for a long time. It must be over 8 years. I can't remember the last time I've been there for that kind of massive celebration. As someone who's grown up in the UK, it's felt like a very much a privilege and a luxury to be able to have major milestone holidays of a cultural nature with family from, well, yeah, with family that are from that culture, really. So when my friends would often go to see their grandmas around the corner and spend time over Christmas, it was never something that was that readily available for me because of how the lunar calendar fell with the school calendar, university. So yeah, this will be the first time. And I got married in a Chinese cultural ceremony earlier towards the end of last year, and it was over so quickly, and I had to leave back to the UK so quickly that I thought, let me try to spend time with my family for Lunar New Year so that we could have a bit of quality time together. And so that was my main rationale. I took no leave over Christmas and New Year just to make sure that I could allocate a solid 2 weeks with my family. And yeah, I think it'll be something that will be very treasured for me going forward. All my grandparents are still with me, and it'll be really special to be able to engage in rituals with them. And I think over time, those rituals will change as well. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to spending more time with them.
That's amazing. And that brings me on to my next question. And it makes me think about, well, the school that I went to, again, in the UK. I grew up in Birmingham. There was a massive population of Muslim students. And so, the school broke up around for the Easter break or for the Christmas break. And when it came down to Eid, it was a couple of days that the students were allowed off. But I remember in my time at being at school, it changing from one day and like the knowledge about it. And then by the time it was coming to the end of my school, there was a few more days that the students were allowed, and it showed the sort of understanding developing further in the school, which was really, at the time, I didn't really take stock, but thinking back, that's pretty interesting to see in that 4 year period while I was from year 7 to year 11. 4 years? Yeah. So I guess my curiosity is, in your working career, have there been examples that you've seen good practice where employers or otherwise have led in those good standards in terms of supporting cultural differences within groups, and specifically around like Lunar New Year as well as speaking, especially as so many organizations will have and appreciate the Christmas break. But then when it comes to annual leave and bank holidays, it can be a little tricky. But when we're thinking about everyone who's in the workplace, like how are we being fair here? So I'm curious about your experience there and any best practice examples. Again, this is a podcast to support people with their learning and to improve conditions and belonging feelings for everyone. So what have you noticed, Lisa?
Yeah, that was a really great question. And just before I leap into that, I just wanted to draw a really interesting link between the red envelopes that I just mentioned for Lunar New Year and how that's influenced cultures in specifically around practice in Malay Muslims in Malaysia, Brunei, Indonesia, and Singapore, where they, instead of red packets, they use a different colored envelope to gift money, commonly green, because green is more reminiscent of Islamic paradise. So instead of red envelopes, you often have green envelopes, and it's based on the Muslim tradition of voluntary charity as well. So yeah, really, really lovely to hear about. And similarly, this red envelope tradition, I think, has also permeated some areas in the local Indian Hindu populations in Singapore and Malaysia for Diwali, where I think the pockets can be different colors as well, possibly even purple. But yeah, going back to pockets of good practice around celebrating the diversity of holidays. I think your example sounds so brilliant, especially to, make sure that children feel seen in terms of their culture from that early age. I think that's really special because it becomes very normalized very early on. And I think that's especially helpful and easier to see in demographics where maybe there's a larger percentage of different groups in a local area, which is very helpful. I have seen and heard of great practice where you can take your annual leave, public holidays that are maybe the ones that you don't celebrate, such as Christmas, and then take them off instead during a cultural celebration at a different time in the calendar year. So I've heard that companies have, allowed and empowered their staff to do that in recognition of how important it is. And I know different companies also have adapted their policies around working abroad and working remotely, especially in this current way of working. They've acknowledged that there should be more flexibility to certain staff, for example, international staff who might be taking leave in their country of origin and would like to work remotely at least a week or two extra a year. So I've seen more and more changes moving towards that direction, which is really great to see.
And I think that that is what the benefits of the remote working and having that flexibility for folks can bring, right? And we talk about flexible working often from a dependent kind of mindset, whether you have care responsibilities, there's families to look after, all of those elements. But there's also these traditions and standards that folks have from their religions, from their culture, that will aid itself to a flexible work pattern as well. And I think that that's a fantastic way to do that, and to consider that, especially when it's your annual leave. Utilize it how you can, and where organizations can be more supportive and encouraging in those spaces. So it's the reminder: take your annual leave. You've got it. There's a reason why people have annual leave. It's to rest and recoup and to celebrate in the way that you need to. So yeah, that's just as a little public service announcement. Take your annual leave when you need to, and where you can, have those conversations about flexibility. Okay. Can we talk about food again, please? Because for me, the symbolism that you were mentioning in terms of food, in terms of traditions, was just absolutely stunning. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about food, but also what elements in terms of symbolism Zodiac has to play in a Lunar New Year, and what this year's Zodiac means for folks.
Yeah, we could do a whole session on all the different types of food and the symbolism across all of that. In Chinese culture, for example, there's a lot of really, really smart and poetic puns in how they use kind of the choice of food, the names of the different dishes, not just, what the food is, but how it's prepared, what the dish is called. And there's so much poetry behind what that encompasses and how that reflects your wishes for the new year. One thing that is a really common dish in Lunar New Year feasts, and they're usually the night before. That's the Lunar New Year feast, the most major meal, and it's a whole buffet of loads of different dishes together. There's often a fish dish of some description, could be braised, could be steamed, loads of different ways. But the symbolism for the fish is that the word for fish is a homonym for abundance. And there's an idiom that says, every year you'll have more abundance. And it also just sounds like you have fish every year, right? Because of the homonym. And so that's one of the most common cornerstones of the Lunar New Year meals as well. And yeah, there's always certain meals across different cultures. There's also longevity noodles that you see a lot. And the idea is, it brings about good fortune, long life. And you often eat longevity noodles. They're just noodles, by the way. They're not especially long, but you just try not to break it up as you slurp it for obvious reasons. And so you often get served longevity noodles at your birthdays, for example. There will also be kind of, I think, rice cake features not just in South Korean culture over Lunar New Year, but also in Chinese culture. And that's even called New Year rice cake. Tangerines feature a lot across different Lunar New Year celebrations, including Vietnam, in China, Singapore. So you'll see those featured a lot as, not just decorations, but also foods, which again just bring luck for the year ahead. There's a lot of gifting of these fruits when you go to see people in their homes. Pineapple tarts are such a nostalgic treat for Singaporean friends. So yeah, everyone has their own food in that sense. And yeah, in Vietnam they have the rice pastries that are filled with pork and other fillings as well, steamed. And yeah, those are just some examples, but we could probably go on for a bit longer. Yeah, with the Zodiac, the story that I grew up with is that there was a myth around the Jade Emperor at the time who was going to designate calendar animals for 12 animals, and how there was going to be a competition to decide who was going to be the first in the calendar. And so how he decided that was a race was announced, and animals were taking part, and whichever animal reached the finish line first and arrived first would be selected. So the top 12 would be incorporated into the calendar. So that's why these animals were featured. So the rat, he took part, he got it very, very early, rushed to the gathering site. This legend is that he encountered an ox that ran much faster. So he then agreed with the ox that the ox would carry the rat, and the rat would, in a symbiotic relationship, sing for the ox or something. So the ox and the rat arrived together first, and look, everyone's happy. But then right before they reached the finish line, the rat just jumped off the ox and sprung for first place. And so, being the sneaky rat he is, he got in first, and he became the first lucky animal of the Zodiac. So I think the order is rat, ox, tiger, rabbit, dragon, snake, horse, sheep, monkey, rooster, dog, and pig. So those are the 12 gods in this story. I think there are often different editions. And very interestingly, not all cultures that celebrate Lunar New Year have these same animals. There's lots of different variations of this story, and not all of these animals feature across all different countries. A lot of people have said, why isn't there a cat in these zodiacs? Because they're quite cute. I'd like to be a cat in a zodiac. But I think one of the legends was cat was very kind of lazy, and it kind of didn't wake up in time to enter the race. But there's a myth that maybe there was maybe cat, I think, because linguistically cat sounded like a different animal in, I think, Vietnamese. And so in the Vietnamese zodiac, they actually have a cat zodiac, and they're the only ones that have this. In Japan, they've got boar instead of pig. But in terms of what these zodiac animals mean, I often find it really helpful to look up online the different personality traits. It's similar, I guess, they give you the different overall personality traits that people might have born within this specific time in the lunar calendar years. So you input your year of birth, date and month, and it gives you your zodiac. It also gives you what your compatibility is like with people from other zodiacs. And when I inputted that, I found out that I was mortal enemies with my younger sister, who, at the time I agreed with, kept on stealing my clothes. So, of course, the dragon and the dog do not get on. But yeah, I find it quite fun just to look these up. The dragon is my zodiac, as I mentioned, and as we're moving into the Lunar New Year for 2024, it's also the year of the dragon this coming year. And so what's happening for me now is a very special kind of year in which the actual zodiac is the same as my own zodiac. And the legend behind that is that it could be quite a bad year if it does fall on your zodiac. There could be evil spirits conspiring to make your year not too great. And so to ward against that, there are things that you can do to try and start the year strong. And a lot of that is, wearing a lot more red close to your body to ward off the evil spirits. And so you might see people wearing red bracelets. Some even wear red underwear the whole year just to kind of steel themselves. And similarly, actually, when we talked about red envelopes, that also has some fables around the red envelopes and money warding against evil spirits. And one of the names for the red envelopes in Chinese is called 压岁钱. And there are different stories again about that, but sui in this it means kind of repressing or warding away money, to ward away the spirit sui. So traditionally in different stories, coins were laid upon in an envelope and they protected a child from this evil spirit. And so every year the elders would then give younger people this kind of warding away spirit money. And so that's where it came from. And so yeah, I'm probably going to invest in a red bracelet of some nature and cite cultural reasons to spend money on that.
I love that for you. Go right ahead. That makes a lot of sense. Do what you can to have the best year possible, right? But this leaves me thinking, like, what's the significance with red? Why red?
Yeah, I think the red symbolizes, I feel like there's a never-ending list of how many things this red color symbolizes in terms of fortune, prosperity, abundance, good luck. You see it as a main celebratory color throughout all different celebrations, including Lunar New Year, including weddings. So yeah, it's a very auspicious color to bring in the new year.
I love that. Okay, thank you. Oh, I'm getting an absolute education, and every single episode of this podcast, I'm learning so much. And thank you for being so generous and gracious with everything that you're sharing, Lisa. I guess one of the things that we spoke about at the beginning of the podcast was the connectivity to ancestors' homes and our homes as being part of diaspora, well, in whatever way that, or diaspora, whichever way that you want to kind of connect to that. And I'm curious to hear a little bit more about what that's been like for you. And, you speaking about married last year, and to celebrate the Lunar New Year, you're heading home this year, and the importance of that for you. And I'm curious to hear a little bit more about what that means to you and why that's important to you, and that connectivity, especially when, you spoke about being able to travel, and it had been a while since you've been able to travel back for 8 years, I think you said, which is a privilege. And I completely understand that. And I appreciate that so deeply. And there's going to be so many people who are in a situation where they will want to, but means won't allow, health won't allow, or maybe there's like a feeling of disconnection. And I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about your experience.
Yeah, that is such a and very, very interesting question to contemplate in terms of connectivity. Well, not connectivity, but connectedness. And I think a lot of that is rooted in the conflict around identity that a lot of people might feel, whether it being a diaspora or just being displaced from, a place where you might have felt more at home. As soon as you're removed from certain elements that you might not otherwise have thought were very important, as soon as you're away for long enough, you notice that they were elements that kind of made up a piece of yourself. And when you're removed from that, you might find that you're then seeking it out more. And I've noticed that a lot, even if you're traveling for a while, or if you've emigrated, those who've emigrated might seem even more connected to their cultures, or connected, more patriotic even. So I think for me, the fact that I'm actively seeking this connectedness now is a reflection of how important it is to reconcile my identity and my comfort with my identity, which I might not have had when I was earlier. Certainly when I was growing up in the UK, I probably didn't particularly have a hankering to go back to China. The UK was all I'd known. And even, going to the country when I was younger, maybe 8, 9, 10, it was just like a discovery, not a rediscovery, because even though we were told that this is a rediscovery, right? Maybe your parents might tell you that this is where you come from, but to you, this is just a whole new world in a lot of ways. And as time goes on, maybe that relationship starts to shift. But at the very beginning, it's still a very foreign place that you might feel a pull to in some ways. You might resonate in certain ways. But for me, China felt like a very novel place that where I still stood out, and standing out in either country just led to more existential questions around what home is, what your identity is. Do you need to have a singular identity that is, intelligible, that people can just know by looking at you, and being able to sit with those multiple nuances? And I think that's something that really had to develop over time, and really understanding the breadths of what it meant to have this cultural heritage, what elements you would be comfortable bringing into your life, bringing into honor, what elements you probably wanted to distance yourself from in some ways, how you wanted to bring that together into your own understanding of how you want to live your life. And I think over time, that then consolidated, and I was able to appreciate visiting, China for what it was, and to be able to rediscover and reconnect on a deeper level. I've since gone back to spend more time with family. And sometimes it's difficult as well when, and I know we've talked about this earlier, but when there's different intergenerational, maybe intercultural beliefs and dualities in terms of the messages that you might be hearing. We talked about food and, the relationship with food, and relationship with people talking about weight, and, being very free to judge and share their judgments and advise on whether we should be eating more, eating less. And a lot of that has a big impact, especially when you're younger. And so there's a lot of nuance in going to confront some of these meatier issues, especially when there's different generations and different levels of respect to navigate. How do you find that space to steel yourself, right? How do you find that place for yourself? How do you then communicate that externally? How do you do that possibly in a different language? How do you do that in a way where it can be respected by different people and different generations, where maybe they might be less likely to hear what you're saying? And all of that can be just trickier to navigate. And the thought of going, to this country where you have all of this to contend with, the fat shaming, for example, and all of this and the different dynamics, it's quite a lot to throw yourself into. So I think over time, that has been something that I've slowly grappled with, and I'm in a much more empowered place now. I have tools and language, phrases to say, to make sure that I'm as comfortable as can be. And that's really allowed me to open myself up to new experiences, to focusing on the connections, and, letting other things just glide off my back. But yeah, it's really been quite a journey in terms of reconciling, appreciating, being curious, wanting to learn. But I think all the while just having a stable sense of self throughout this has been really key.
It resonates so deeply with so much of what you said there, Lisa. So much of what you said. The connectivity of this knowing it, the connected nature, and this knowing but not knowing. And I mentioned this to you, and So my family are from the Caribbean. My dad's side from Jamaica, my mum's side from Barbados. And yeah, there was a wonderful family celebration. We were able to go back to Barbados last year, and there were so many of us there, and it was one of quite a big family holiday without my grandparents now because they're not with us anymore. And yet there were so many cousins that were there having a wonderful time, and there were so many different occasions where I was just like, this feels right. I feel like Nan's here. I feel like Granddad's here. I feel this sense, and that was such a comfort. It was such a hug. Also, a beautiful Caribbean beach. Like, of course, you're going to be in very good vibes, right? But that sense of home, but not home, it was so reassuring, and I can't quite put into words, but that level of yeah, like, you're good. This is for you. This is of you, and I agree that the appreciation for that comes with age, comes with experience that I may not have appreciated as much if I was younger. And then when you're talking about the food elements, you show me love by feeding me and offering me all of these foods, and yet you have so much judgment around the food that I eat. What do I reject your love? Do I take your love? What is these things? And I don't think that this is something that is isolated, and clearly not. And I wonder specifically in this sense of like, it's to care, to show love in the older generation way, or the generational way of, is this you looking out for me? Are you sure? Do you realize that these words aren't as helpful? But again, it's that level of familiarity as well. So it's not, what's interesting is it's not always from those who are older, but those who feel more familiar to you, and they can because I can say this. But again, it's those lines, isn't it? And that balance between, how do I keep it respectable but cute? How do I like firm here and making sure that I'm very clear on my boundaries, as we all need, but still being respectful to what, for the folks that need and deserve the respect, right? It's an interesting dance that a lot of us, and when I say us, I mean of diaspora, whatever diaspora what you mean when you're in the UK and family members are not necessarily from, ancestors are not from the UK, what that dance feels like, right? It's an interesting space. It's an interesting space to
Definitely.
navigate.
I think when you're younger, you're right. It just feels, these statements we take so much to heart, and it's quite difficult to understand that there's any other meaning behind it, any other care, and we're quite easy to, I guess, ruffle in that sense, and so it's quite difficult to take it in any other compassionate way. Whereas with a bit of greater cultural awareness, a bit of awareness as to what maybe sociocultural reasons behind it, worrying about, maybe think there's often the discussion that, yes, if you've gained weight, then it shows that you are living well. And, in other socioeconomic climates, and that's something that was very much desired. And I think that also helped me to contextualize what was being said. But I think, yeah, really finding the language to respond sometimes as well. So I developed different phrases that I would say to my parents. I'd let them know that, I probably don't need to hear this, so please don't make any comments about it. And that's a level of assertiveness that is not necessarily something I'd seen in Chinese culture, especially from a child to their parent. And I think, yeah, that's definitely something that's been really helpful. And when delivered in a way that maybe my parents resonated with, in a kind of respectful, compassionate way, it made it easier for them to understand that, this was something that might have different consequences, and it was a learning experience for them. But I think navigating that relationship is really tricky sometimes, especially in cultures where as a maybe younger person, you'll be told, you think too much. Don't, you know, there's less kind of critical reflection of what young people are saying. So for me and a lot of my peers, I've heard stories about trying to find new ways to communicate and gain better understanding across the generations. And yeah, it's great to see more of that happening for sure. And I loved what you shared about how you felt. I think what resonated was how safe your home, but not home felt. It was just, to me, safety was the kind of key word there, in that it's not necessarily what you've seen all the time, what you think of logistically as home, but there's a huge sense of belonging. And I think there'll be that when I go back to China. The other main aspect I think that provides that sense of belonging in some ways is that I'll be in an ethnic majority for the first time in a long time. And that's also super novel as an experience, because obviously so much of what we're talking about is being minoritized. And in, the UK, that's discourse that we're all very familiar with. But it's really interesting how fluid this kind of minoritization is, such that as soon as you leave a certain space, you no longer feel that way. You could probably feel that way even in different pockets of the city that you'd live in, but it's really eye-opening to see that. And it's also a privilege in that sense, that when I am abroad, I will no longer be a minority in that sense. And for me, that'll be quite novel. I'll enjoy it while it lasts.
I hear that. I hear that. I mean, we're from two huge cities in the UK, London and Birmingham, right? And so of the cities and towns across the UK, we probably see the most diversity, the most range of people. And still, when you're able to go home, or when you're able to go to a country or island where you are the majority, it it's still this very interesting, kind of moment. I love the things that you were talking about. We were touching on identity, and for me, that's one of the reasons why I absolutely love these podcast episodes. Right, the learning that happened and the sharing between you and your parents that can be replicated with any group, I would say, of lacking of understanding, whether it's generational, whether it's experience, whether it's cultural. It's about having those conversations and making sure that the language is clear, making sure that it's respectful. Respectful. These are the same principles that we'd want to see in not only in family, in chosen family, in friends, in relationships, in the workplace. So thank you, Lisa. I really appreciate you sharing as much as you have in this episode, and sharing as much of the rich traditions and cultures. And I don't think I've stopped smiling the whole episode. I've just thoroughly enjoyed this. I guess to round off our time together, I'd like to offer you to share if there's anything else that you would like, anything in particular that you would like folks to take away from this experience, this episode, and how folks can connect with you and learn a little bit more about the work that you do. And, I heard public speakers. So yeah, platform's yours. How can folks stay connected with you and your work?
Yeah, thanks so much. It's been, really, really great to speak and mainly smile and speak today. In terms of takeaways, I guess it's really personal, right? I hope that anyone listening or watching this will have found one thing that is, interesting, whether it's a tidbit about Lunar New Year or something a bit more universal in terms of the human relationships and how we navigate culture, identity, how we reconcile and find joy and celebration amidst all the nuances of the challenges of all of these questions around existing and diversity. It's such a complex experience, but one that's always has so much to explore especially for myself, I'm still learning, I'm still exploring, I'm still really interested to use culture and food to find out less of what divides us, but more of what connects us. And, as we talk about East and Southeast Asian culture, East and Southeast Asian experiences, a lot of these are not, confined to one demographic, one ethnicity at all. And I hope that some of these shares and stories might have resonated with listeners across different cultures. And yeah, I'd love to hear more if so. And yes, in terms of public speaking, I deliver training and public speaking sessions on East and Southeast Asian culture. And I especially am really curious and talk about it through a structural lens, because we can't isolate these and isolate communities. So those are my interests, and happy to chat further if anyone has any questions about today or would like to know anything further. The best way to contact me is via email. Feel free to, comment wherever this is shared on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Lisa Wang. You can find me there on Instagram as well. My email or my website is lisa-wang.com. So yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
It always is. It's always a great time when we connect, Lisa. Thank you so much. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. And listener, make sure you show Lisa all the love. And yeah, I've been Mikayla, and I'll see you next time. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for tuning into the podcast. Please do spread the word about our channel and tune in for our next episode.